Hi everyone, welcome to our sales podcast. Our sales podcast, we are interviewing professionals in the sales and marketing industry that share their wisdom in order to make the ecosystem, the Israeli ecosystem, bigger and stronger, and the economy of Israel stronger. So I would like to welcome today Alex Waiman, the head of sales of Zesty. Before being the head of sales of Zesty, he was the head of strategic accounts at Lusha, director of sales at Optimive, business development manager at Cornerstone, Nasdaq listed company, product specialist at clickTale. And before he was a consultant to the Minister of Finance of Israel and consultant at KPMG. Welcome.
Very much. When you list all my different jobs like that, I realize how long I've been working and how old I am. I'm not sure it's something to be proud of, but thank you for sharing the long career that I've had so far.
And the experience, and the wide experience that you have. It's the most
Exactly.
important.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely lots of experiences, definitely lots of different places, and I think it's the best way to learn is get experience from all different places. There's always something to learn from wherever you go, and whatever type of job and whatever type of tough kid. So yeah, I've certainly had a lot of that.
Excellent. So can you share about your background? You made Aliyah to Israel, your early days, how you became from being a consultant to the Minister of Economics of Israel, become a consulting KPMG, business development, sales professional, head of sales.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to. I think perhaps it helps to take it back a bit further to academia or you know my academic studies. So you can hear from my accent, obviously I'm English, born and bred in London. I personally always had from an academic perspective, I always had an interest in like the crossover between economics and politics. I studied international relations in university. I always saw myself doing something in where government meets business. And I really found that, you know, the crossover between those two areas particularly interesting. So as I graduated university and you know, from a more personal level, I was born and raised in a very Zioni home, very Zionist home. And so when I graduated university, it was my natural progression in my career to go get a job in the Israeli embassy working in the economics department. And the focus of the economics department of the Israeli embassy in London was how to introduce investment opportunities to the investment community in London in Israel. So there was a very big, there was an amazing opportunity to be, there always has been an amazing opportunity to be investing in Israel. There was an incredible appetite from the investment community in London to be doing so. And we were there to facilitate it, to make introductions, to create connections, to explain how the ecosystem worked, to bring over new people who weren't otherwise exposed to the area, etc., etc. And it was a very interesting time to see, as I said, this crossover, particularly from a global perspective. And so that was really how I started. But in fact, as I was working very much with the investment community, more and more I got an interest for business. You know, whilst I was very much sitting on the fence between the two, talking about the exposures that I get, I was very interested in understanding business at a deeper, more fundamental level. And that's when my opportunity to become a strategy consultant at KPMG, working in the city in London in Canary Wharf, came about, for which I did 3.5 years. Strategy consulting in KPMG means a lot of M&A type work, market forecasting, a lot of different projects to enable companies to understand growth opportunities, where those opportunities are, if they're either within the business, internal, or indeed external, and what those opportunities were and how to address them in the most efficient and robust way. being a consultant is a great way to cut your teeth across a very broad range of subjects. So you get to, you know, it's relatively short-term projects. You're going to a company for a matter of weeks or months, understanding the business at the core level that you can, and then making a series of recommendations, and then moving on to the next project and the next project and the next project. And it was quite a quick velocity from that perspective. The opportunity for a young person, as I was at the time, is to really broaden my horizons, have incredible exposure to a great cross-section of industry, of business, but then also to see, what fascinated me was to see the similarities across all of them, how many businesses, the core fundamentals of business, in terms of different business units, how the different business units operate with one another, how they rely on one another, how you know, they different areas of the business can deliver growth. That was really what fascinated me. And anyway, moving ahead, as my career progressed, I started seeing, you know, more and more the opportunity in Israel to come over to Israel, how the economy here is booming, and it was a great opportunity to accelerate my career, moving to Israel, and also fulfill a personal passion of mine, which was to fulfill my Zionist ambitions. So after 3.5 years, I hung up my consulting boots and I came to Israel, and I started exploring the Israeli job market. Since we're doing this interview in English, you can obviously understand my Hebrew's okay. My Hebrew was okay, but it's not probably professional. It's certainly not professional level. And so that put me on a big back foot immediately, because there are only certain industries which can accept or where you can get by and really progress and excel with English as a mother tongue. And specifically, high tech is one of those. High tech is an area where the nature of high tech businesses, of these technology businesses, is they're so outward facing that indeed they're all set up with English as a first language. The communications are in English, global for the company, meetings are typically held in English, and English as a mother tongue, in fact, is often seen as an advantage as opposed to a disadvantage. And whereas, you know, I was already quite accelerated in my career in management consulting or strategy consulting, in fact, the opportunity, particularly from an English perspective, was really in high tech. And anyway, the opportunity to, you know, coming here almost 9 years ago, there was already a boom, obviously, in the high tech industry, but it was still only in its early stages. There were many companies to choose from, but a lot of the big names that you hear now were just small startups then, such as the rapid growth of the industry. So I decided to pivot my career a little bit, and in fact, if anything, I would say I would share this with anybody else who's planning on making Aliyah. I was overwhelmed by the amount of opportunity that was available to me with English as a mother tongue, and in fact, that I was seen as a preferential candidate to many of my Israeli peers who perhaps had accents or whatever else. It was very, very straightforward for me to find work, and that was one of my big concerns for myself making Aliyah. But in fact, I found it very straightforward. Now, moreover, to share with that the background which I had coming from experience with the Israeli embassy, so I had a good familiarity with Israeli industry and the Israeli economy, plus the background of consulting, so a very broad set of understanding of how businesses work. I found it very easy to find work very quickly. My active decision was to pursue a career at that point in high tech. And at that point, I had to decide which area to enter high tech. For me at the time, there was several different options available. The one which I found made the most sense for myself at the time was sales. Why did sales appeal to me at the time? One of the things I enjoyed the most in my consulting work was engaging customers or engaging the client, understanding the client, understanding their business, understanding their challenges, understanding indeed what they were looking to achieve in the future. And this lies at the core principles of indeed what it means to be solution selling. We hear it time and time again now. If you're listening out to thought leaders in the industry in sales, everybody's talking about understanding the customer, listening to the customer, how indeed you can pull out from them, help them understand what indeed their challenges are, so that they can paint a picture in how to grow and how to move forward in the future. And these were skills which I had refined as a consultant over several years. And so the transition from consulting to sales made a lot of sense to me. I started as it says product specialist. It's essentially a BDR role or outbound sales at ClickTale at the time. And again, thinking about advice which I've given to other people who have made Aliyah, who are considering making Aliyah, I believe that this is the best way to crack into the industry. If people are looking to get into high tech, then taking a BDR role is very robust, very an excellent training and launchpad to get into high tech, into the broad area of high tech, and if you're particularly interested in focusing on sales. I say this because I'm not familiar with so many different areas of businesses which require as little experience in the role as necessarily a BDR does. I know from my experience managing a BDR team at Zesty, we give a lot of the training in order to enable those with, fresh out of college, with the opportunity to learn the industry, learn the skills, learn what solution selling means from ground zero all the way through. And this is really our breeding ground to create future Zesters, and where people can really accelerate their career in the industry. And so this is the experience that I had. I worked as a BDR for a year and a bit. I had one of the best managers from a training perspective. He really taught me a huge amount on how to sell, how to understand the customer, what processes mean, the importance of following a clear guideline in how to manage a customer through a process. And that was a wonderful stepping stone for me. And I think from that moment, I really realized that I was a natural in speaking to customers. And that was why I've really pursued the sales career moving forwards. I'm also quite lucky having a background in consulting, in that I'm very process orientated. I like to look at businesses and how they work. What are the mechanics and the functions of the business, and how that works? And I do that down to granular detail, and that's helped me in building teams, building the processes in which teams work. It's very important to understand this, even if you're an individual contributor and as well as one's career accelerates. It's very important to understand mechanics of how it works, so that you can identify areas of improvements and how you can build to scale. because everything about high tech that we're talking about day in, day out is around scale. How can we scale? How can we do this as quickly as possible? How can we do this as efficiently as possible? And so I found that my background in business consulting has definitely helped me from that perspective.
So you've been working with many companies at different sales positions. So sales is sales in each and every company?
Wonderful question. There's some fundamentals of it that I think do reign true. Then there's considerable differences depending on industry, depending on size of on contract value, depending on velocity of sale. I tell you an interesting anecdote. So we're now selling enterprise software. We sell deals for $1 million plus, and these obviously take a big level of effort to understand the customer, understand where they're at, what are the specific challenges that they've been having, how your solution can necessarily help them address what they're going through at this specific moment. And then I compare that to my previous job at Lusha, where I built out the sales team at Lusha. Lusha was considerably more transactional. We were selling a unit of a product, and it was very clear for the customer to understand exactly how many units they wanted. And so from that perspective, as a salesperson, it was to make the sale as seamless and perhaps quick as possible. And also it was more of a relationship building, because you knew that once they had finished consuming whatever it is that they had consumed, that they would come back to you and buy more and more and more. And so the two different types of sales were actually quite different. One being relationship building, one being understanding understanding the business and solution selling. That said, from the fundamentals of it, we're talking about a person-to-person connection, of which they've both required that person to pick up and develop that relationship with the other, even if it's looking for a different type of objective at the end of it.
Cool. So for example, so you move from Lusha and from other companies, which are high-tech companies, to Zesty, which is in the cloud and really deep tech. How was the transfer?
Wow, big. Zesty, yeah, Zesty is a really interesting one because, as you say, we're selling cloud technologies, and at least from my experience, I've worked in marketing technologies, I've worked in edutech, I've then worked in sales tech, and now I've moved into cloud. So yeah, so you're definitely right that I've sold in several different types of verticals. The sales is different, the experience is different, and the learning curve is huge. Particularly now I'm working in a very technological vertical, selling to DevOps, a very technological person, and you need to be able to sit in front of that person and be able to understand the things that they're telling you, and also to identify any pain points or any challenges that they're experiencing, even if they may not be aware of it. And for that, you need a huge amount of understanding of of the technology that you're selling and the ecosystem that you're selling into. More than that, so yeah, there's definitely huge differences from selling in all different types of verticals. And actually what I found in my time in sales and high-tech sales is there's more and more the ecosystem of sales is changing as we evolve. And I give you an example of this. Now we're selling in the ecosystem of AWS and Azure. What does this mean? This means that there's various different tools for me to leverage within this ecosystem, of which I now need to be a more well-rounded type of salesperson. So, for example, every time we sell to our end customer, and we're part of this co-sell motion where we engage our counterparts at AWS, who is their account manager, and we sell together Zesty's solution. So now not only am I still a salesperson, but now I'm also a partner manager because I'm managing this partner relationship. And if I do this effectively, I'm going to have a higher chance of success in selling to this end customer. So I've now need to add another string to my bow. And so I think that as sales evolves and as companies become more sophisticated in the way they go to market, a salesperson needs to add more skills to their repertoire in order to make them as successful as possible. I certainly, when recruiting for the sales team here, I'm looking for people who will have familiarity with both of these types of motions, selling direct to the customer and partner management, because the two of them together will make them as successful as possible.
The difference between Zesty and Lusha. Lusha, for example, it's a $50 per month company.
Mm-hmm.
When it starts to make sense to have a sales team to sell it?
It's super interesting. I don't, from my experience from Lusha, I don't believe that it's necessarily reflective of the value of the contract as much as the amount of trust and familiarity that your end customer will have with your product. Indeed, it was Lusha's intention on the outset to be fully self-service. I joined Lusha around 5 months after it established, because they understood pretty quickly that despite their intention to be fully self-service, their customer may not be as familiar or as trusting to purchase and keep on purchasing and keep on transacting with them. And so they needed that person to pick up the phone and start building that relationship, even on a relatively smaller transaction value. If they wanted to increase the velocity of the sale, they needed that person in order to encourage that sale to take place. And so for us, it wasn't so much transaction value as much as familiarity or early stages of going to market in order to encourage that sale to happen. That said, I was with Lusha for 4 years, and as things started evolving at Lusha, we started getting more market presence, obviously, more familiarity. And so those smaller transactions, we started allowing them to just take place online in the self-service model that was originally intended. And then it became more around the relationship building and helping companies which had repeated transactions and larger transactions start to do larger deals, annual upfront contracts where there was discounting available, things like this. So what we're really talking about is not necessarily a clear distinction on this is the value, this is how you can separate it. I think it's more, there's an evolution of a business. And I think that there's a good fit for a salesperson at any point in the evolution, and it's necessary to understand where that company fits within the market, within its own market at that time, and what best suits the customer for that company at that time. It's constantly evolving, and I'm sure in the 2 years since I left Lusha, it's evolved further since. They've become considerably more sophisticated in who the sales team is talking to now. Now they're talking about enterprise contracts. They're selling to huge enterprises with hundreds of people across the world who require access to their tool. And so you need a different sale now. But that wasn't necessarily the case on the outset. On the outset, it was just selling to the individual and making it quick and transactional. So these things evolve, and it's necessary to keep on your toes and keep on seeing where is the sweet spot to allow for self-service to take place, and where the salesperson needs to step in order to encourage more transactions.
So what you said, it was really interesting. So if I put aside the enterprise sales, which are, I guess that in Lusha are similar, more or less, the enterprise to Zesty, what you mean it's a different segment, like the self-service of SaaS companies, that you assisted to increase the conversion rate of the sales because people weren't have enough assurance or trust in the product, or they have some questions. And once
I'll give you a really interesting example of one of the first enterprise deals I sold. Enterprise deals at Lusha. It was CRM software, one that we're all incredibly familiar with. We use day to day. And what we saw was transactions, individual transactions taking place all across the world. But those people weren't necessarily talking to one another, because why would they? You know, you have a BDR manager in Sydney isn't necessarily talking to the BDR manager in New York. And they're not necessarily talking about small sales tools which are transacting on hundreds of dollars at a time. They're just transacting on their credit card. So once we noticed this take place, it was my effort to reach out to those people and say, okay, what we can see is this is taking place. These are the patterns that we're identifying with your business and how they're transacting with our business. Let me enable you to transact at greater scale with greater efficiency and greater value. And for that, we need to map how we can sell this, you know, globally across the organization. So let's work together to start moving this up the food chain and through the necessary procurement channels and the relevant channels. That process wasn't straightforward at all. It was a very lengthy process of mapping the right people in the right channels, in the right, you know, destinations, in order to be able to sell a global contract to that company. In the end, you know, this was hundreds of thousands from the first deal that we sold, and I believe it's grown rapidly ever since I originally sold it. But that required some level of intelligence, of human intelligence, to be able to identify it and to enable that conversation to take place with the customer, to do that mapping and then move it forward.
And this is the born of a new growth channel and an opportunity.
Exactly.
When you sell, do you use a specific methodology?
Yes, yeah. I subscribe to Medic. I think it's a very robust way to understand the customer, and I found it very, how do I say, succinct in terms of pipeline reviews. From my perspective, what I'm looking for is I'm looking for my sales team to be able to communicate to me in as straightforward way as possible exactly where they are in the sales process, what are any challenges that they have, what are the next steps, and how they intend to overcome them, and who they're engaging with this. And that whole conversation, talking about any single deal, should take, you know, between 2 to 5 minutes, unless obviously there's a broader conversation in terms of strategy and how we're looking. But if we're just doing a quick understanding of where this deal and the status of this deal stands, then that's what I'm looking for. And from that perspective, I find Medic to be the most robust way to understand the various elements of what's taking place within the sale. We're identifying the right levels of stakeholders. We're understanding how to engage them, what's going to engage them. We know exactly, you know, the processes of which we need to move this forwards, and assuming that we've filled this, and I'm quite what's the word? We're very structured in the way that we complete this within each opportunity record. Then it should be very clear for the salesperson exactly what they need to do in order to move this deal forwards. And it should be very easy for the sales manager in order to understand what are necessarily any gaps which are taking place, which the salesperson, to hold the salesperson accountable for.
If you look at the funnel, so how do you manage the funnels? How often do you look at it or discuss it? How do you do it? You do it personally, one-on-one, you do it as a team, you do it to the whole company. Is the BDR involved? It's only the account manager or the salesperson? How do you do it?
Okay, so yeah, so the from a pipeline review perspective with each individual account executive, our sales team lead Yoni will hold a one-on-one with each of the account executives, where he will go through. You'll look at the helicopter view of all of the accounts and look whether there's any obvious gaps from the helicopter view. So we'll have a report showing all the different fields which we've necessarily completed within each opportunity record, and we're looking for any obvious gaps or obvious red flags. Has an opportunity been there too long? Has an opportunity, does it not have a next step? Does it not have the relevant stakeholders identified yet? One of these gaps, we're looking first off for any red flags to understand exactly what those gaps are, so we can have a conversation around addressing them. Assuming that everything is in order, you know, utopia, and nothing's ever really 100%, and so but assuming everything's in order, then it can be a relatively straightforward conversation to understand exactly, you know, how much we have, what's moving forwards, or what type of velocity, etc., etc. That's down to the micro level with the individual account executive, and then, you know, our sales team lead Yoni will have conversations around how to go addressing any of those gaps in order to move them forwards, and more of a strategic conversation from that perspective. Then that rolls up to conversation that I will have with our sales team lead, which is more of a broader pipeline review. What's our velocity? We're looking at you know, several KPIs to understand how we're doing from a forecasting perspective. Are we moving our opportunities into the right stages? Do we have enough coverage in order to hit our targets? If not, where are the gaps in the coverage? What can we necessarily do to, you know, address any of those gaps? And these are fairly the cadence of the conversations will be taking place on a weekly basis. And then in terms of reporting it back to the business, to the C-level, that will take place on a monthly basis.
In the big deals, are the team leader involved? Are you involved? It's a team. It's a team play. How it works?
Oh, awesome question. Awesome question. This is one of the hardest things I found as moving into sales management. Is what's the right level of engagement? And my personal management style is to try and have the level of engagement dictated bottom up. So we'll obviously have a lot of visibility over the larger deals, and there's some, you know, considerable outliers in our pipeline. And we'll be keeping a regular review on them, and regular conversations will be having with each of those AEs. And then the question will regularly be raised. Okay, whom are we meeting? Do we have the right level of coverage for this meeting coming up within the next week? What's their level? Do we need any any comparable level of Zesty individual who's going to be joining this call, whether it's coming from a technical perspective or whether it's coming from the business perspective? I'm very lucky to have a very engaged C-level. So our CEO, CTO, and CRO are all very engaged in wanting to contribute to the opportunities as and when they can. And so we'll regularly ask that question of the AE. At what point do they think that it's relevant in order to pull in C-level engagement for that deal in order to enable it to move forwards? And the purpose of pulling in, of escalating engagement is twofold. One, to enable it at the beginning of the process to show that we're backing this opportunity, and, you know, you've got the right level of oversight from the Zesty perspective. And then later in the process, once obviously we try escalating it to on the customer side, then they should have the right level of understanding of whom they're talking to. As well, one of the things that we're regularly looking to do from escalating engagement levels is we want the customer to want to buy into our long-term vision. We're actually very lucky to have an incredible net retention rate. Our customers stay with us for a long time. I mean, we've been around for 3.5 years, and we want them to buy into.
They see the price.
Exactly. I mean, like, yeah, I'm lucky to be selling a no-brainer product, but we want them to understand where the journey's going. And so for that, we also escalate engagement levels. So we say, you know, we try to put in C-level as early as possible, particularly on those larger accounts, particularly on, you know, those major household names, to say, this is the journey that we're building at Zesty. This is how it's going to be impacting you, and we want to be taking this journey together. And so that conversation takes place quite early as well. So there's various escalation opportunities, but again, this comes down to asking the AE to dictate to us, as we don't want to, you know, encroach too much on their opportunities. We want everybody to be their manager and the manager of their pipeline as much as possible.
And how do you manage the funnel, and which tool?
Combination, really Salesforce and Gong, combination of the two.
What do you do at Gong compared to Salesforce? In Salesforce, I assume you see the funnel. It's a Kanban board, and in the Gong, how do you use it?
Yeah, so Gong's quite interesting from a function perspective for also reviewing deals and progression of deals and also a number of insights. I'm not sure if you've seen the deal tab in Gong, but I use that quite heavily. So there's a few different functions within the deal tab. One of them is just to give us an overview. When I was talking before about looking for gaps or red flags, you can create a report within Gong which will flag a number of things and a number of features around certain behaviors in the deal. Obvious ones, you know, are there next calls scheduled? When was the last time that they were contacted? Have we had that type of response? Have we had a response from them within a certain period, etc., etc.? And you can create a very good view for this, which can drive the conversation, which can drive the pipeline conversations. In addition, something which Gong has also been quite helpful with is insights. And I'm particularly using insights to understand what certain items are spoken about within our opportunities and how they're impacting our win rate. So I give you an example. We make a lot of transactions via the AWS marketplace. We find it improves our transaction cycle considerably, and it improves the transaction cycle, and it gives a lot of confidence to the customer in order to transact with us. Now, because we've had such a positive experience from selling via the marketplace, we're now able to feedback this to the sales team to encourage them to talk about it more on deals. So now I've created trackers around this, and I can see when are they bringing this up in the deal, how regularly, how many of their customers they're bringing this up. Are they interested in transacting via the marketplace? Are they familiar with the marketplace, etc., etc.? Do they have, you know, certain characteristics which makes a marketplace transaction relevant for them? And then what's the impact on my win rate as a result of them having this conversation? That's just one of many examples of different types of things which I'm trying to encourage the team to talk about more in their deals, and I'm trying to see what the impact of this is over the long term.
Cool. And what do you do with the Salesforce? And can you give a brief about Salesforce to the audience? Maybe not all of them are familiar with it.
So Salesforce is probably the most widely used. No, in fact, I think Pipedrive is the most widely used, but Salesforce, certainly from SaaS and enterprise SaaS, is probably the most widely used CRM, which means it's the central source of truth. It's where all engagements will take place with all customers. And so that's coming from BDRs, that's coming from our outbound and inbound sales team, from the sales team, Cloud Alliance, customer success, everything, all of those engagements will take place and will be tracked within Salesforce. And then Salesforce will enable us to break down all these different business processes, different business units, different objects, etc., in order for us to see the customer and the customer engagements as clearly as possible. We will then track that back. We've actually only relatively recently moved from HubSpot to Salesforce, and it's order for us to improve our overall reporting, because there's so many more options and it's so much more robust from that perspective, from a reporting perspective. And essentially, what we're looking, it's conducting most of our KPI, it's tracking most of our KPIs, certainly throughout the sales organization, also the CS organization. And this is fundamental KPIs, which most of your audience will be tracking. You know, our win rate, our sales, our sales cycle, our values, etc. All of these dashboards we'll be creating, we'll be sharing them with the team, with TVs put up around the team, so that people understand exactly how they're performing on an individual level, how the team is performing totally, how the whole company is performing, so we have clear transparency throughout the company. Everything will come from the most granular level all the way up to the largest level, and so you've got full visibility throughout the entire organization. And so it's really important for us to track each and every engagement in as clear and measurable way as possible, because then this will, you know, eventually give us the tools in order to understand where are the opportunities for growth, where are the challenges that we're experiencing, and what do we need to do in order to address any of those challenges. Are we performing according to target, or are we short? If we're short, where are we short? Why are we short in this respect, and what we need to do in order to address that. The conversation which we could have from a reporting perspective on Salesforce and what we're using it to report on is a huge one, but it's the list is endless, and it really depends how sophisticated that specific sales organization is, and that RevOps or sales ops organization is, in order to build the necessary reporting, make sure that the data is clean, because clean data, we have regular sales hygiene conversations, and then what insights you can derive from that, which can perhaps be used to force change within the organization.
If we take one step back regarding the strategy and the leads, the inbound, the outbound, how do you set the strategy? You mentioned that currently, for example, you work with AWS, with the cross-sell, and with Lusha, you understood that if you have a few people from the same company, you have an opportunity for an enterprise sale. So do you sell directly? Do you work with partners? Do you only work with partners?
Yeah, it's a great question you ask, Ayal. I'll be honest, I've had, again, very different experiences from very different companies. And Zesty is the most interesting one. Typically, I'll find a given company will go to market primarily in one specific channel. For example, at Lusha, we went direct to customer. They were downloading the Google Chrome plugin direct from the Lusha website, and then we were talking direct with the customer. And there wasn't really many other channels which we were engaging with from that perspective. Made it very straightforward for us to understand how we talk to the customer, the conversations that we should be having. There wasn't really any nuances about it because it was all one channel. And now I've gone to a completely different extreme. Zesty is using every common channel to go to market that I'm familiar with. We're talking direct to customers regularly. Customers are either coming inbound on our website. We're doing a lot of campaigns in order to bring them to our website. We have a very fruitful partner channel, of which you're familiar with, where we will we have two options from a partner perspective. Either the partner will white label and resell our product as their own, or indeed they'll act as a referral and introduce their customers to us, and then we'll sell to them as a direct customer. We have customers coming to us via AWS, and indeed we do a lot in order to foster our relationships with AWS in order for them to introduce their accounts to us. And then as you mentioned, we've got both inbound and outbound campaigns and flows. So we're doing everything all at once, and it's incredibly complex in order to manage this part, to manage exactly where this customer is coming from, how to attribute the success with this customer to whichever channel that we need to attribute it to, because obviously every business unit needs to be showing that they're delivering on their given KPIs, and so we need to be able to handle this very, very carefully. I'll give you a specific example of this. A partner will obviously want to talk to the customer, but what will happen if indeed the Zesty outbound or sales org are trying to talk to the same customer? Then there can be some confusion in that. In order to try and manage that conversation as carefully as possible, we've created clear rules of engagement whereby the customer needs to raise exclusivity for a given period of time, and that will stop the Zesty organization doing any type of conversation with that customer, giving the partner the opportunity to do so. Typically, we tend to give favor to our partners because we want to encourage our partners as much as possible, and so when they raise exclusivity, they typically have priority over our internal teams. And then once, obviously, if that partner is successful, then fantastic. But if that partner doesn't manage to bring that customer to us, then their exclusivity will expire, and that account or opportunity to engage with that account will then be reopened back to the Zesty team to do so ourselves. And so we need to be particularly careful around this sensitivity of this, because obviously we want to give the customer as positive experience as possible, and we also want to encourage our partners to be as successful as possible to work with us to improve further future success. So it's very carefully planned rules of engagement in who and how and when any given channel can indeed talk to that customer.
Then how do you manage the exclusivity? It's a field in the Salesforce?
Fields in Salesforce. We're very lucky to have a very sophisticated RevOps team. The RevOps team have built a very advanced, the most advanced I've ever seen in my experience in working, advanced sales stack, whereby a partner should be raising exclusivity in a partner portal in which we share with each and every one of our partners. They will be flagging this for exclusivity. That will immediately send an automatic request, which will be reviewed at Zesty. If there's no engagement already on that account, then that exclusivity request will be approved, and they will be removed from the view of anybody else within the organization.
And what kind of partners do you have?
I mean, we've got tens of partners. I think it's coming up close to 100.
But all from the same type. Most of them are AWS partners, so they have different kind of partnership.
So our flagship product is primarily on AWS, and so most of the partners that we have work within the AWS ecosystem, and we found this to be unbelievable for our go-to-market and very quick growth as a startup. So yes, most of them are AWS at the moment, and as I say, there's primarily two different types of partners when you think about their business models and go-to-market plans. There's resellers and referrals. The core differences between them: a reseller will typically be taking other products and reselling them, and their customers won't necessarily have any direct lines of engagement to the origin of where that product is coming from. So if they're selling Zesty, we will never speak to that customer. They're selling it as part of us, and those partners will be quite sophisticated in their setup in terms of having the necessary internal support, having technical setup, very advanced sales teams to understand how to sell into this, etc., etc. And we'll do a very rigorous due diligence on those partners to make sure that they meet the criteria in order to be reselling Zesty's product. And then alternatively, there's also referral partners. Referral partners are typically those who will act on behalf of the customer, going out and sourcing best in breed or best in class products from wherever they exist, and then they will make that introduction to Zesty and to Zesty's sales team. Zesty's sales team will lead from the sales engagement perspective, and the referral partner will manage the relationship throughout. And so, and in those cases, obviously, that end customer will have exposure to Zesty.
And you mentioned that you also work with the CRO, so you have a channel of marketing, direct marketing, that people are approaching your site.
Absolutely, yes. We're running a lot of campaigns all across channels, and these campaigns are typically intended to drive traffic towards our website, or indeed drive traffic towards our landing page within the AWS marketplace. On our website, there's a free trial, and this is indeed, even when, at the end of the demo, this is where we're encouraging the first step following the demo to take place. And much like is common practice in SaaS, there'll be a box in the corner. There's a box in the corner of our website where it'll say free trial. They'll sign up to the free trial and they'll start using Zesty in the freemium mode.
In the B2B, what do you find to be effective? What kind of marketing? Which it's YouTube, it's Facebook, it's LinkedIn. Where is the most effective?
Ooh. I'll be honest, I'm not sure.
Yes,
I'm a salesperson, so I'm not necessarily a marketing person. I probably don't know about this well enough. Although I'd say what I do manage is the BDR, the inbound and outbound sales teams, and they're having a huge amount of success on LinkedIn. And I think, in fact, that's also mirrored from, anecdotally, I understand that that's also mirrored from the campaigns that we're running on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is the #1 go-to at the moment, in B2B. And that's where a huge amount of the conversations that we're driving are taking place.
So thank you very much.
No worries, mate. Happy to help.
It was really interesting, and I'm sure that I know so many people will learn about it and will make their companies better.
I hope so.